Welcome everybody. This video is going to talk to you about the Mockito testing framework and why you might want to use mocks. I mean, what are they for? How do they help? Where should you use them? Where do they come up in a testing scenario? My name is Ken Cousin. I'm the author of the book Mockito Made Clear, recently published by the Pragmatic Programmers. Now, I'm writing all this in an article. This article is going to be published by the Pragmatic Programmers in their Medium publication, but some people aren't really interested in reading the articles and some people aren't interested in reading them on Medium. So let me show you the actual situation, and then you can decide later whether you're interested in the article or not. So here's my situation. I have a class here called Publisher. Now this is going to be a standard publish-subscribe situation. So my publisher has an attribute that is a collection of subscribers. So we have this array list and it's assigned to a list, and I've got a subscribe method so that each subscriber can be added to the publisher using the subscribe method, and then they get added to the list. So far so good. Here's the method I actually want to test. The method is called send. I'm going to send out a string when it's ready, and what the method implementation does is it loops through the subscribers one by one, and it invokes the onNext method with that message for each subscriber. Now, there's two complications here. One is that the send method doesn't return anything. It's always hard to test methods that return void. So what are we going to test? Usually when a method doesn't return anything, you have to test the state of the object, and all we have is a list of subscribers, and that list doesn't change when we call send. So that's not going to help. The other complication is that I'm allowing for the fact that if onNext throws an exception, we're just going to catch it and ignore it. Which is not a good thing, but it also makes life harder to test. How do we know that the onNext method got called for each of the subscribers? This is where mocks come in. The ability to test the interaction is going to be the key. Now let me define that. In the article, I have this little section talking about the definition of mocks and stubs. Now, this definition is based on one that was published many years ago by Martin Fowler in his post entitled Mocks Aren't Stubs. I'll put the link to that post in the description. The idea is that a stub stands in. It's a fake object that stands in for your dependency, and it responds the way you want it to. So if I say, when I call this method with these arguments, here's what I want back, that's what it does. Whereas a mock does the exact same thing, but it also keeps track of the interaction. It keeps track of how many times the class I'm testing called the methods in the mock, how many times they were called, with what arguments, and were they called in the right order. So that's called the protocol, and a mock keeps track of the protocol. And that's exactly what we need in this case. So returning to the test here, in my publisher test, I instantiate a publisher, and I use Mockito's static mock method to create a mock object of the subscriber. And I made two of them. And in my before each method in JUnit, where I'm adding the subscribers, I invoke the subscribe method on that publisher for each of the subscribers. So now, before each test, I have a publisher with two subscribers in it. Here is the first test. Publisher sends a message to all subscribers. So we call send. Now remember, there's nothing coming back. So there's nothing for me to check in any of that. However, I can verify. The verify method in Mockito allows me to verify that certain behavior happened exactly once. And in this case, I'm verifying that on sub 1, its onNext method was invoked exactly once with the hello string, and also the same thing happened for sub 2. And when this test passes, I know that my infrastructure worked, that the onNext method was invoked for each subscriber. Great. Now remember, there were two paths through that code. One was just looping over them and calling onNext. The other path is what happens if we throw an exception. So my next test says we can handle misbehaving subscribers. Now I need to set the expectations on one of the subscribers so that it throws an exception when its onNext method is called. And the classic syntax, when and then throw, doesn't work if a method on a dependency returns void. Instead, I have to use this do throw syntax. So this line says, do throw a runtime exception when sub1 has its onNext method invoked with any string. So now I've set the expectation. Sub1, when we call onNext on it, when the publisher calls that, will throw an exception. So we send out 2 messages just to be absolutely sure. And we can still verify that on each of them, the onNext method was invoked twice. On sub2 with any string. On sub1, I decided to refine it so it's not just any string, it's a string with the following pattern: message and then a space and then a digit. Nice and simple, and everything works. And I have verified that even when sub1 throws an exception, then sub2, or actually the publisher code, the send code, is doing exactly what we wanted. And that's a perfect use case for a mock. I don't care what the subscriber is actually doing. I can simulate the behavior using Mockito, and I can simulate it to both succeed and fail and verify that my publisher is working, even though the send method returns nothing and catches and ignores exceptions. Now that would be enough. Let me throw in a warning, okay? What if in my publisher, I added a method called send parallel, or more to the point, I modified my send method to send these messages in parallel. I can put in a for each here, which is explicitly non-deterministic. If we're in parallel, there's no guarantee which order the subscribers will be used. So in my test, I could put in a method like this, a test like this, to say, let's wrap both those mocks in an inOrder object, and then I could verify that sub1 and sub2 had their onNext methods invoked with hello in that order. Now, in the original mechanism with send, that'll pass because it was just a standard for loop. But if I call the send parallel, there's no guarantee this is going to work because there's no guarantee on the ordering anymore. Now, I could fix it, but the important point is don't overspecify the tests. If I leave it the way it is, if I leave that in-order test in there, it will in fact pass, but I've now constrained the developer of the publisher and told them they can't improve their algorithm or modify it in such a way that these methods don't get invoked in the order I'm expecting, even though I don't really care about the order in this particular case. So be careful when using tools like Mockito or any testing tool that you don't overspecify the condition. All right, what's the conclusion here? Mocks are used when you want to represent a dependency, but you care about the protocol, that you care that the class you're testing calls the methods in its dependencies the right number of times with the right arguments, and maybe in the right order. And if you keep that in mind, you should use mocks pretty effectively. Thank you for listening. If you found this valuable, please click the like button or share, or especially subscribe. If you have any questions or comments at all, please feel free to add a comment there and I will try to get back to you. So thank you very much for your attention. Take care.